First, I want to start by saying that people of African descent have been coming and living in Nova Scotia for over 400 years. Myself, out of all the accomplishments that I've had, that I've created, that I've been accomplishing, I've always made sure that people know that I come from East Preston, Nova Scotia. East Preston is one of 50-plus Indigenous communities, Indigenous African Nova Scotian communities, which a lot of people are not familiar and are not aware that we have such a long history here in Nova Scotia. Now, when I refer to myself as being African Nova Scotian, I use that title to self-identify because I feel as if my ancestry, well, I know that my ancestry came to this province before we were Canada, before we were colonized in the way that we recognize it today. I know others don't recognize the title as being African Nova Scotian. They prefer to use the title Black. But this isn't a history lesson. I'm not here to talk to you about, my history. I definitely can, but we can save that for a later day. But I do want to address some of the challenges that we face with people of African descent living here in Nova Scotia. As I've, traveled around the world, as I've accomplished many things, including being able to be a student here at St. Mary's, I've recognized that the issues that we face in our communities are not ones that have come to us because of accident. They have been systemically put onto our communities and people that look like me for many generations in our past. For instance, I was just at a community meeting earlier this week, and we were talking about the lack of safety in our community in terms of the ability for my family and other families to walk along the main street to get to a local park. I listened to elders, those 50-plus years older than me, share stories of how their parents were asking the government to put sidewalks in our community so that they could walk to school. Those are the same conversations that I'm currently having with politicians and the government in terms of I want to be able to safely take my children to the park as well. So my question that I have to you is, where do we go from here? The systemic barriers that we face are very long. We can talk about the high incarceration rate of people of African descent, that being 2% of our population in Nova Scotia are Black, yet 14% of those youth incarcerated are of African descent. We can talk about the lack of educational opportunities. We can talk about the lack of employment opportunities. The list goes on. But my question to you is, how can we in this room and those around the world make this a better place for future generations? We cannot change the past. We know what happened there. But we can take that past and learn from it to progress and have a better world for the next and upcoming generations. I like to often share with people that I would not have gotten to this place that I've gotten to if it wasn't for basketball. Basketball, as I mentioned in my bio, was my tool of overcoming some of these systemic barriers that people faced. Once I finished St. Mary's University, I realized basketball was not making me happy anymore. So I very quickly decided to leave the ball behind and pursue my career and pursue my personal goals to become a mother and to, actively try to support my community. So the role that I ask of all of you is to be allies, is to practice allyship. Because we know that those that make the decisions, we know that those that make the policies, we know that the systems that educate us, the systems that supposedly keep us safe, are not run by people that look like me. If we take a look at our recent news headlines, we can talk about the relationship between the police and Blacks. When you look at a headline that says that people of African descent are 6 times more likely to be street checked, which means they are 6 times more likely to be pulled over and to be racially profiled because of the color of their skin. Well, I can honestly say that doesn't make me want to pick up the phone and call the police if I'm going through a difficult time. Within our Black communities, within our African Nova Scotian communities, we have a very strong code of silence. That code of silence is what we use in the past and what we continue to use to protect ourselves from the outside world. We often have struggles, just like every other community, just like every other group of people, but we are less likely to seek help from outside sources because in the past and presently, we aren't always welcomed with open arms. So my ask of you today is to practice allyship. What does that mean exactly? Well, I would say that being an ally is using your voice to better understand the challenges of people from marginalized groups. It's not something that is going to come easy. It's not something that you can show up one day and say, hey, I'm an ally, let me help you. Because I will honestly say that there is a lot of anger within our Black communities, and if you take a look at our history, I think it's justified. However, people of African descent, every day we get up and go to work. Every day we choose to come to class, we raise our families, we do so much that we don't talk about. We find ways of being resilient when every time we step outside of our Black communities, we're often faced with either oppression or some form of racism. So when you do show up, don't expect to show up. Don't expect to necessarily be welcomed with open arms. Because just as this is challenging for you to step outside of your comfort zone, recognize that this is not something that we are also familiar with. Recognize that this is new to us as well. Now, it's been documented that anger is not the first emotion, but often the second emotion. Anger is the one that is often the one that gets heard the most. But anger is often a cover for feeling hopeless, for feeling fear, for being ashamed, and the list goes on. So if you come in contact with one of our communities and you're addressed with anger, don't feel as if that anger is directed towards you. We're happy you finally showed up. But you need to recognize that we have anger for generations. The oppression that my people face is not something that I can tell you about because I'm not very old. But I can tell you that the stories that I listen to within my community are stories that I faced when I walked into this campus, when I traveled across the world. It's stories that have gone on for decades and centuries. Being an ally requires a little bit of work too, so I'm going to give you guys some homework. It requires you to check your privilege. For me, the fact that I'm standing on this stage, able to share some of my lived experience with you, I recognize my privilege. For others, it might be your gender, your religion, the color of your skin. It could be many other social constructs. It requires you to deeply look into your biases, whether those are implicit or unconscious, because we all have them. It requires you to come in with the mindset that you are going to be the passenger and not the driver, because ultimately we know what we want. We may not be able to always express exactly what that is. We might be able to tell you what does not work, but we can definitely tell you what we want and what we need. So don't show up expecting to give me something, and don't expect me to always accept that something, because that may not be what fits within my community. Now, doing these things takes something that I know you all already have. It takes courage. It takes for you to intentionally be courageous to step outside your comfort zone. For me, getting up on the stage takes courage. For all of you, going to class takes courage. Getting up, asking the hard questions takes courage. Playing sports in front of a huge stadium takes courage. So these are things that you're already doing, but I'm just asking that you be intentional with your courage, be intentional with your pursuit of being an ally, and hopefully we can make the world a better place for the next generation and more generations to come. Thank you.